All right, hello there. This is David Legan from the NOD Training Group, and today we're talking about the fruit production inquiry for August 2022. Might see this one referred to more as Apple Peach Pear AP. This survey is essentially just an ag yield survey for apples, peaches, and pears. It does fall under that non-citrus fruit 134 project code. Questionnaires mail out July 22nd. Web reporting option is available. This information will be released with the crop production report on August 12th. We have several different versions depending on what state you happen to be in. So if you are in New York and Virginia, that questionnaire only asks about apples. Colorado, Georgia, New Jersey, and South Carolina only ask about peaches. Michigan and Pennsylvania ask about apples and peaches. In California, you have apples, freestone peaches, and clingstone peaches, as well as pears. Oregon, you have apples and pears, and then Washington, you have apples, peaches, and pears. All right, here's some fresh picked info for the three crops looking back at 2021 data. Apples had 290,000 total bearing acres. Washington is the number one there with 172,000 of it. The average yield per acre was 33,900 pounds. Washington had the highest yield per acre at 39,300 pounds. Peaches came in at 74,400 total bearing age acres. California was the leader there with 36,800. South Carolina, Georgia, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania round out your top five. The average yield per acre on peaches was 9.26 tons, but that does range pretty drastically from as low as 3.5 all the way up to 15.3 tons. Pears came in with 41,700 bearing age acres. Washington is the leader there with 18,300 of those. Oregon and California round out the top three, and the average yield for pears was 16.8 tons per acre. Now note that with this survey, we are looking for 2022 crop year expected production of those apples, peaches, and pears. So at this point, we're not asking about end use, we are just asking for their expected production, regardless of whatever the fruit might be used for. So even if it's going to fresh market, processing, whatever, that doesn't matter. We're not really asking about that now. We just want to figure out kind of their forecast for what they think that they will produce this year. As I'm sure you've seen on many of the other fruit and vegetable surveys that we do, there are a wide variety of possible units that may be reported. Oftentimes these have varying weights. So anytime somebody reports anything like a bushel or a crate or a basket, flat, any of that, make sure that you are getting the weight of that unit in pounds. If you happen to be interviewing in California where they have those peaches broke out between clingstone and freestone, you might be able to figure out what those are just based on the name, because with the clingstone, that is one where the flesh that clings to the stone of the peach, whereas the freestone, it separates easily. With the clingstone peaches, they're typically used for commercial canning and are mechanically separated, and oftentimes these are measured in tons and producers more likely to provide a yield estimate. With the freestone peaches, those are probably going to be preferred for eating. If it's sold for fresh use, the producers here would likely report in terms of boxes, in which case you'll need them to supply the weight of that box. The screening will ask if they have any of the specific fruit tree acres, and then if no, we want to figure out what's happening with that land, get some comments explaining what's going on in the operation. Assuming they do have one of the items of interest, it asks if they have it this year, and then if so, we want to know the total acres of that crop this year, and then of that, we always pick up that bearing age. And as always, bearing age is just that. It's bearing age. It doesn't necessarily mean that they produced a really good crop this year. As long as it was bearing age, that does count. They could have had something like a freeze. They could have disease issues that are impacting their production. But as long as they are of bearing age, they should be recorded as such. And then after that, we pick up the total production or the expected yield for this year. And remember, if it's not something like pounds or tons, and it's something along the lines of boxes, bins, or bushels, you need to ask how much those weigh. Even if in some areas it's kind of standardized that, a bushel is a certain amount of pounds, you do need to ask every operator just to make sure that we are using the same numbers, and that way we can make sure that our data is going in correctly. And so that really takes us through the survey. As you can see, it's very simple. We said it's like an ag yield, and it really is, because all we pick up is, do they have any one of these three items, apples, peaches, or pears? If they do, how many acres of it did they have? How many of those are bearing age? And then what do they expect to produce this year? Being that it's so short, we don't have too many things we need to talk about. Watch out for current total and or bearing acres differing from the previous. So on both of the acre questions, if that's changed a lot since the last time you've contacted them, it would be great to figure out what's going on there and leave that in a note. Obviously, bearing acres can't be greater than total. If that's the case, it most likely is just that they maybe misheard you and gave you the opposite theirs. But whatever it is, obviously the bearing can't be greater than total. If there's a low bearing to total acreage ratio, that's something that always kind of stands out to us, and that's something that they're looking for in the data analysis after these surveys have all been entered. If you do have operations that report having bearing age acres, but then they report not having any production, that is possible if there was something like, a late freeze that has, damaged the crop real bad, or if there's some sort of diseases. But whatever it is, that should be able to go into a note so that statistician isn't looking at this and scratching their head wondering why they have bearing acres but no production. And then obviously if the yield seems high or low, we gave the average yields there in the beginning. So if those yields are really high or really low, ask what's going on and see if you can get some justification or some explanation from the operator and put that in your notes, pass along to the RFO stats. Remember that we are talking about the 2022 crop year expected production. We're not recapping 2021 or anything like that. Watch those decimal points, comes into play on the acres and the pounds per unit. With those units, be sure to get all the details surrounding it. So, the yield per acre could be pounds, it could be boxes, it could be bins per acre, it could be a lot of different things. Bin and bushel can even have different pounds. That can even be sort of regional. There might be differences between what they consider a bushel. And then remember that bearing age is just bearing age, even in cases of limited or no production this year. But as we mentioned, if you do have bearing age, but little or no production, that's going to be something that we need a note explaining that. Be sure to leave comments explaining any unusual situations. Statisticians really depend on your notes for things about weather, disease, insect, market, labor, any of those issues that have affected the market. It would be great if you could pass that along, because your interactions with these producers are oftentimes how we find out that stuff like that is going on within an industry. Those comments are also really helpful as the statisticians go back, review the data from these surveys, set their estimates, and communicate with headquarters. Once again, I will remind you that we've got the Census of Ag mailing out this December, and because of that, we need to contact any operation that was in business for any part of 2022. So anytime on this survey or any other survey this year, if somebody tells you that they're out of business, please ask when they went out of business, and then if they were in business at any time this year, please leave that in a note so we can update our records and mail them a census form. As mentioned, this is a very simple survey. You're just picking up the amount of acres and their expected production. So there's not a lot there that you'd really need to be too worried about or that you would need to practice. But it's always a good idea to go ahead, open up the questionnaire, spin through it, familiarize yourself with that before you start interviewing so that you can know what's going on and not have any surprises there when you're out conducting interviews. All right, and that will do it for me. As always, do not hesitate to contact your supervisor or RFO if you have any questions. Last but certainly not least, thank you for all the hard work on this August fruit apple peach pear survey. That's all, folks.